Hello everyone, this is Tara with the Painted Cicada, and you are here for Pastel Owl. I am so glad that you're here. Gosh, what a busy day I've had. I'm super excited to get started on this. I really need some decompression time. So I am running a few minutes behind, but I thought that would make a good opportunity for me to transfer the tracer and show you how I do that. Super easy to do. But first, before I get started, I will quickly go over the supply list. I do have my work surface lifted up just slightly with watercolor. I think it's important to be close to the camera. So I'm working on top of a giant 4-inch, 5-inch binder here, which is kind of weird, but anyway, that's why my setup looks a little funny. So let me have this focus. Come on, focus. Anyway, gosh, I better not have camera issues tonight. Okay. So when you signed up with me, you got this watercolor supply list and the video link. And if you've made it here, you have found this. But I am going to use watercolor paper. My favorite brand is Canson XL. So I'm going to use this in a 9x12 size. This is one of my favorite brands to use. It is inexpensive, but still has a quality watercolor paper effect. So that's what I'll be using tonight. As far as watercolors, I am going to be using my vintage palette from Art Philosophy, but you can use any watercolors that you like, and to be honest, you can change up the colors, so don't feel like you have to do exactly as I'm doing. But I'm going to use this Prima Confections watercolor pastels, and so with it what I get is a black or a gray, a blue, magenta, yellow, metallic gold, white, orange, green, and brown. If you have other watercolors and you want to get a pastel look, you just add more water. We thin out the paint. But I'm going to go ahead and use this palette here. I have a lot of palettes to choose from, so like I said, don't be afraid to shake up the colors. I might need to pull out some other options for me to get that magenta, and that is fine for you to do as well. So we're just going to kind of play with it a little bit. I mentioned white gouache. I think you say that gouache, I don't know. Or liquid acrylic in a white. And so I've got this liquid acrylic. If you just have white acrylic paint, you can thin it down a little bit, and that will work as well. And then gold glitter paint is optional, but let's see what I've got. That is to add some chunky glitter on the background. I'm not gonna have a chunky glitter. Let me see. So I've got this Galaxy glitter. Let's see. Oh my gosh. This is a glitterific glitter. It's a pink glitter. Thought that would look cute. What else we got? This is kind of one of those situations where you could certainly use anything that you have. I'm having an issue getting it in because my drawer is an absolute mess. This is what I was looking for, my chunky glitterific glitter. But whether your glitter is fine or chunky, you can use whatever you think would be fun to accent the background with. So much mess in my drawer. I keep telling myself I need to clean that out, and one day I'll get to it, right? But again, all colors are suggestions. Use what you have, use what you love. And I even did pull out with my watercolors. I've got this one iridescent set. I don't know that I'll be able to incorporate that tonight, but I like to try to incorporate it when I can because I really like it. All right. So the first step that we're going to do is to transfer this onto our watercolor paper. So I mentioned you need the transfer, which was included. Oops. Well, that doesn't work. My goodness. I need to hit the paper, and then let's try that again. My settings are all botched up. Okay. So you're going to want either your carbon paper and your transfer. And then if you're using carbon paper, you want to put it, here's my watercolor paper. Here is my carbon paper, and then you put your transfer right on top of that. If you don't have transfer paper, what you can do is use a pencil. Actually, here's the pencil bag. Use a pencil. You can scribble on the back. So here's my transfer. Oops, my camera with paper. You can scribble all over the back with your pencil. And then when you transfer it, it works just like the carbon paper. So if you don't have carbon paper, don't freak out. Just use a pencil as your carbon, as your transfer. All right. So I am going to place this on here and then lightly transfer the design. I actually may not go quite as light as I normally would, just because you still have to see it on camera. And working with watercolor is almost the opposite of acrylic. So typically with acrylic, we're going to go dark to light. With watercolor, we're going to go light and we're going to darken it. So we do our areas with the lightest color first, and then we little by little darken what we're going to do. So I am going to transfer this. So I am just lightly going over all the petals. And certainly this flower and these pumpkins are not all that complicated. The hardest part of this design is the drawing of the owl, which is why I include that tracer so we can get his proportions right. But even as far as the owl goes, he's pretty simplified. All right, so here's that tracer design. Now typically, like I said, I pushed fairly hard because I wanted you to see on camera, but typically the goal for a tracer is just to go as light as possible. All right, get all of this stuff out of the way. And let's get painting. So for watercolor, you are obviously going to need some water. As far as brushes go, I just recommended various sizes with your brush. Typically small, medium, and large. For watercolor, I almost always exclusively use rounds, but it really is totally up to you. So let's see, let me get a nice large round brush. We are going to start with the background, and I am going to go with magenta or pink. If you have bright colors, I'm going to show you what to do here. If you have brights, if you're starting with brights, what we're going to do is take some of that magenta and just really thin it down. So we want a very transparent pink. Or if you have the vintage palette like I have, I'm going to use a nice concentrated pink. So this color is already very pastel, and so I'm going to use that straight from the pan here. Whereas if you have a magenta color that you're working from, you just want to make sure it's very, very thin. And either way is fine. We are going to work wet on wet. So let's decide here. The first thing that I am going to do is I'm going to wet everything. And actually, let me use this colored piece. So everything out here around my design, I want to be wet. Be very careful not to go into your design, because everywhere that has water is going to spread. So I'm going to go right up to the lines of the flower, underneath that pumpkin, all the way to the edge of my page. Now you can't really see the wetness unless I catch the glare there, but I'm going right up to the design edge and then all the way to the edge of my paper with water. This is just water. And I'm just careful not to go into my design, because once that's wet, my watercolor, when we add color, is going to spread there. So everything up to the edge of the design, but not actually over those tracer lines. And so I just want a nice thin layer of water on my paper. So you can kind of see all of that edge is wet. And whether you're using this thin magenta color, really thin, or maybe you're going to use the vintage pastels like I used. Either way, and I might actually use a combination, because I know that when people enrolled for the class, they have a variety of different colors. So over on this side here, this is that vintage pastel, and I'm just going to add in and mix in color to the wet water. And that's what that pastel looks like. This on this side here is what that magenta would look like if you thinned it. There's no right or wrong. If you've got both like I have, you can even use both. So we're just adding a nice light pink color to that background. And remember, my paper is already wet, so as I add this in, it's going to move and spread. And it is also okay, it's almost preferred for you to have color variation in your background. So switch up the saturation so that some parts of your background have more pigment than others. So that's kind of what we're going for here, is some areas will be darker. So I'm going to add more pigment maybe around the moon, maybe up here in that top right corner. So some areas might be lighter, some might be darker. Just play with it until you are happy. Ooh, that is lots of pigment. Alright, so just moving this pigment around until I'm happy with areas of light and dark in the background. So that's step one, is just getting a background color, wet on wet watercolor with a magenta or pink. While I've got my magenta and my pink out, I am going to pull out some of this bright magenta, again, while we're working with it, whatever magenta or pink you have, and I'm just going to put a layer on this flower here. Not the pumpkin, but just the flower, because I know that this is also going to be a magenta and a pink tone. So use whatever you have left over and just get a nice thin coat on there as well. So while this is not technically part of the background, it's actually in the foreground. I know I'm going to have to work up this layer of pink for the flower anyway. So just getting a nice bright first layer. And you can kind of be a little sloppy with it. I'm not too worried about the color being perfect since we're going to build that up. All right, so this is just my paper towel. I do want my background to dry. Sometimes it can take watercolor a little while. That's why on these supply lists, I did recommend, if it's an option for you to use a heat gun or a hair dryer, you can definitely use that at any point to speed along the process. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start focusing in on my moon. So for that, we're going to use a little bit of the black and gray in blue tones. And again, having this outline, not ideal. So if it's an option for you, if you've got some pencil mark that you can erase, obviously I need this to be on the camera to show you the design. But when we're working with watercolor, we don't want to see our outlines. So if it's an option for you to erase some of that, go ahead and do that. Here, I'm going to pull out my metallics. All right, so for this, we're using blues and gray or black. If you thin out black, it's going to become a gray. So what I'm going to do is get a little blue on my palette. And again, I'm using my pastels, but if you have this type of palette, just add a touch of blue and a lot of water. And what I'm going to do is I want this to be very splotchy, so I'm just going to kind of tap and roll. So I'm kind of rolling my brush and tapping it around here. Now my background is dry. The first thing I'm going to do is just take that light blue color. Remember, I want it fairly desaturated because this is a pastel. And we're just kind of tapping and rolling some of this onto the background of our moon. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. It's just kind of a tap and roll to apply some color to the moon here. Now I am going to let that sit for just a second. The camera's having a fit because of the water reflection. Actually, hold on for 1 second. I am going to stop this camera and I'm going to change this camera setting. All right, hopefully that helps. That also gave this just a moment to dry a little bit. So some of this is wet, most of this has absorbed in. And so what I'm going to do is with my wet brush, just water, I'm going to come in and kind of swirl some of this out. So that is kind of a nice light blue background there. And then I'm going to go back into my blue pigment and just tap in a few more spots. Oh, hi, Kathy. Okay, so now I restarted and now I can see comments. Oh, that's good. Okay, sorry, I've had some comments in there. If I've missed your comments, I'm sorry. Sorry. Live problems. All right, so this is just a really thinned out blue, and now I'm tapping some more of that blue in there. So really, I just take kind of a swipe right off that light blue and mix it in with water, and I just get this, nice lightly pigmented blue. So that's what the water does, is just thin that out. And so I'm just going to tap some of this in there. And so that kind of just gets a fun little effect on there. Now I've got some metallic watercolors. So I did mention having a gold. For this step, if you have a metallic watercolor, that's awesome. If you have a pearlescent watercolor, that's awesome as well. If you don't have either of these, but you have a gold acrylic paint, you can thin that down and add it in. Technically that's mixed media, but you know, there's no art police, so who cares? If you don't have either of these colors, you can use a light yellow and do that as well. So I'm just going to add some water right here on my gold, and I'm going to tap some gold in here. Just kind of the same way I did with the blue. Just, you know, tapping in splotches of color. You can move it around a little bit. The key here is to kind of be free and messy. That's easier said than done. Sometimes we try really hard to control what we're doing. But the less you think about it for this, the better it will turn out, to be honest. All right, so I've got these. See how it's just kind of splotchy? That's what we're going for. And while I'm working on the inside of this moon, all of my outside edges are drying, which is a beautiful thing. Here, so I've got that splotchiness. So right now I'm going to mute myself and I am going to hit this with my dryer. So if you have a hair dryer or a heat gun, I'm just going to dry some of this so I can move on to the next step. Okay, so sometimes in watercolor, your paper will wrinkle or curl. So if you noticed, I flipped over my paper and I dried the back. Sometimes that helps with that. So if you have that issue, that's one little trick you can do. Now what I'm going to do, so I have those splotches on my moon. I'm going to come back in with a wet brush and I am going to re-wet some of this and just pull it out towards the end and towards the owl here and let it blend. Now I don't want to rework too much of it, but I just want to soften kind of those edges where the watercolor dried. And I'm going to go right out to the edge of my pink and to the edge of the owl. And again, there's no right or wrong, so if you want to add in some color, feel free to do that. But right now, I just want this to be more softly blended. And I'm not going to really mess with the inside of those patches. I'm going to leave that dry. I'm just going to rework and move some of this so that it goes to my edge. And again, let's pretend that these tracer lines are not there in person. Hopefully yours are much lighter than mine. But I wanted to, you know, for the sake of teaching a lesson, I think it's important you can see where I'm working, right? All right, so I blended out just to make, you know, hardly anything is pure white. So I wanted to just blend just a little bit of that color out. And then now is the point where you can kind of look at your moon. And if you want to add, so I said we're mostly working with blue and gray. Now's the time I'm going to pull some of that gray. So actually I dip in black. I'm going to add a lot of water to this black, and that will make it a nice thin gray tone. And then I'm just going to add just some splotches right in there with gray. Random. So that kind of gives the effect of shadows on the moon. So in our moon, blue and gray are the primary colors that we use. There's just hints of gold in there, and that's lots of fun. All right, now we're gonna start working on this owl. So I'm gonna continue to let the background dry, the moon dry. Let's add some color on our owl. Oh my goodness, my kitty cat's in here scratching. All right, so I am gonna move to a small round brush, and I am gonna get some yellow here on my palette. And as far as our working with yellow, we can work fairly concentrated. So my yellow is kind of dull. If you've got a bright yellow like this, you can add just the tiniest touch of another color to dull it down. So maybe even, I would thin it quite a bit. And if it's too bright, you can just add a smidge, the tiniest touch of blue. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add yellow to the outside circle of my eyes. So in the eye, here's my sample. There are two circles, right? We've got the outside and the inside. And the inside circle is mostly blackish. So this outside circle here, I'm adding in yellow. I'm also going to add yellow to his little nose. And then also what I'm going to do is right here next to this tracer line, oops, he's got a wing that curves down around. So I've got a tracer line there. I'm going to add some yellow right next to it and just highlight kind of where his wing meets the rest of his body. Most of this owl here we're going to fill with some darker shading. So I just want some yellow in there. And again, I hate wasting paint, so I'm going to thin out this yellow a little bit. And I'm just going to add dots of yellow here and there around the edges, just using what I have left over, because this yellow might peek through in a later step, and that's kind of fun. So, you know, like I said, just using what I have left over on my palette. You lift up. So he's kind of messy, right? That's what I want him to look like right now. We're going to add some more of that shading, and he's going to look more owl-like. All right, so we are going to go into some of his brown tones. So I'm going to use the color that I have here is called Cocoa. I'm just going to put some of that right on my palette. And then of course, I want to thin that down. Since we're working with pastels, we're using nice muted pastel colors. So I'm going to add some water. So actually I've got a lot of paint here and I don't need all that, so I'm going to remove some so that I don't make a giant mess. All right. So for this, I'm just going to use a medium brush. Let's see, I'm going to check my tone. I think that's okay. All right, so the value of this, again, you want to add water till it's nice and thin. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come around the edge with this light brown, and I'm going to go over right next to that tracer line, because I want that to be somewhat hidden Again, if you can erase it, or if you've gone nice and light, you won't see it as apparent as mine. So with this kind of light, watered down, chocolatey brown, everywhere I have a tracer line, I'm going to go right on top of it or next to it and add that brown. So we've got his little chin here. And then all around the outside, and then he's got a little V up here that we're going to leave nice and dark. Once you do that, now I'm not going to add any brown down in here. Most of the shading here is going to be gray. Okay, what I'm going to do is I am going to go over my tracer lines right next to that yellow. I don't want to cover up the yellow, but I'm going to add brown right next to it on his wing there. And then I'm going to pull that up under his chin. And then over here, I'm just going to pull some brown kind of into the shape of his wing. A little bit here and there, kind of just feathery strokes. And then the area right under his chin there, almost all completely brown. Also, we are going to just add some little feathery strokes up here on the crown of his head. And a little bit around his eyes to the right and the left. And a little bit underneath. All right, next we are going to work with a gray. So if you've got that thinned out black, you can use that. If you have a gray available, that is awesome as well. I'm going to use a gray since I have that available to me, but you can always thin out your black. All right, so using the same medium-sized brush, I'm going to come through with this grayish black, and I'm going to use very light dabs when I do this. So up here at the top of the ear, what I want to do is add just a little bit on his ear up at the top of this gray. So this is kind of a gray, a dark gray, a blackish. And then I'm going to accent little strokes, that little V that he's got on his crown. And a few strokes up towards the tip of this ear as well. I'm going to pull some of that down around his beak. And I'm just using short, quick, feathery strokes with the tip of this medium-sized brush. All right, now I'm really going to accent the break between his face and his body. So I am going to just short, feathery strokes right around there. My cat is making the eyes at me like he's going to jump on this desk. And I hope that he does not do that. All right. So I went around his neck there. So now what I'm going to do, and I'm going to work in sections. So right now I'm going to work on this piece that is his wing. So I'm going to just add in a little bit of black around the edge there. A little bit of black and chunky feathery strokes right up the middle. When I say black, I mean this grayish black that we're working with. And then maybe a stroke or two close to that yellow. And then I'm going to follow kind of right underneath that brown we did to really define that wing. And that's it. That wing is super easy. And if you've got white showing through, that's fine because owls have white. All right, same color, that blackish gray. Now we're going to add some shadowing underneath. So I have a lot less brown here, but down here towards the tail, he's going to be darker. So I'm going to add and I'm just kind of tapping and moving. Some shadow there. So all my dark colors are going to be mostly around the bottom here. I'm going to tap in a little bit going up. Now what I'm going to do is wipe off my brush and just add some water to my brush and just, you know, what I just put down, blend that out just a little bit. Just to eliminate some of that white. And so I'll show you what I have up close. All right, so we're going to let that dry. We're going to move on to the pumpkin. So this is kind of our first layer. The owl will have some defining strokes in there after he's dry. But now we're going to add some color into the pumpkin. So obviously we are going to work with orange. So whether or not you have a pastel orange, you can use a bright orange again and just thin it down. Or you can use, if you're working with pastels, use orange available to you. So I'm going to get my orange ready. All right, so the key here is thin, transparent color. And I am working wet on dry with this, so I've got my wet watercolor, but my paper is dry. Now what I'm going to do is just swipe in some color in streaks. So I'm going to start at the edge and add in this color in kind of a streaky manner. So here in the circle of the pumpkin, I'm just going to recreate that circle and then maybe fill in there. Same thing down here, working in streaks. Now down here at the bottom, there is a glare. So I'm going to surround the area of that glare with my orange here. But we're just adding patches of color in there there's no right or wrong how you add your patches, but my method here is to pretty much go in all the large areas, adding a patch of color, and then I'm going to come through and add a patch of color, a streak on the tracer line as well, which you're going to be able to see through my piece, but hopefully on yours you do not see quite as much. I'm making a mess today. All right, so we've added a few patches of color in. Now underneath my pumpkin, this area is the most shadowed, so I am going to add a patch of color under there as well. Wipe off my brush, and then I can pull this down. And then right from that shadowed area, go ahead and pull some up as well. I am going to wipe off my brush. A lot of this has had time to soak in. I'm going to blow on it just slightly. If you've got a paper towel or a piece of paper, you can also wave it over a little bit. I just want a little bit of dry to happen here. All right, I'm going to wet my brush, and I'm going to pull this color out. So we're still going to see some of those streak lines, and that's fine. Those are going to stay. But I'm going to pull some of this color out. So if it's still a little wet, it'll pull out easily. If it's dry, it'll reactivate slightly. And I am going to pull this out over the glare line. So our whole pumpkin at this point should not have any white, but there will be areas that are lighter than others. So I have colored all of the pumpkin with the orange by moving this around. But because we let some dry, some areas are lighter than others. All right, so we're going to move kind of from area to area as we do this because some of our sections need to dry. So now I'm going to go back to this flower, and I'm going to get my magenta and a medium size round. Again, I'm going to thin out that color. We're working with pastels, so we don't want it to be too crazy. But we already have one layer down here, right? So now we're going to add a second layer of color. So I've got this magenta, just to show you kind of the toner value here. That's what I'm working with. So it's thinned down, but it's still nice and bright. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go around all the edges of the flowers to make the edges darker than the rest. And then I can add some color here in the middle. And once I have this nice dark color here in the middle, I'm just going to pull it out just a little bit into some of those petals. So I place the color in the center and then I pull outward. I'm going to lift this up closer to the camera. But there's no perfection in this process. You need more. Got it here in your center. And then pull it out. All right, so we're gonna go back to the pumpkin. Again, I'm gonna switch to my large brush. Get my orange going. I want my paint a little slightly more concentrated, so add a little more pigment, not a lot, but what we're gonna do is start adding darker areas. So I've got a little bit darker color on my brush, and I'm going to pull down around the side here, down to the bottom. I'm going to go over those tracer lines here in the center. I got this large circle. And then over here, I'm going to follow those tracer lines. So just adding some areas of darkness. I'm going to pull down here in the middle, pull down here in the center, and here. And I'm going to do the same thing on this bottom pumpkin. So I'm going to kind of envision that this pulls behind this flower, right? So I'm going to want this down here. Our center line. I'm going to pull next to that area, but I'm not going to fill that in. I'm going to go around this. This is supposed to be like a glare here. I'm going to pull some patches of color up from the bottom because remember, most of the shadow is going to happen at the base of the pumpkin. Here around the flower, I'm just going to paint most of this in with this darker orange and then pull it up. All right, with the same dark orange, I'm going to go under this pumpkin because shadow. Wipe off my brush and then pull any of that wetness down. Now, while I have some of this pumpkin color here, I want to add just a little shadowing. So I've got my gray that I have left over from earlier and my pumpkin. I'm going to swoop in the gray, come over here, add a little gray to this pumpkin. And while this is wet, I'm just going to pull some of that underneath. Very little. Wipe off my brush. And then I can pull that down. And mostly I'm pulling it down at the top and then where those pumpkin lines are. And you can pull some up as well, since that's shadowy. So since it's wet, it does pull out. So we have to work fast, but that adds some shadowing to that pumpkin. All right, so let's let that pumpkin dry. We're going to go back to our flower. I want to darken this magenta just a little bit, so I'm going to tap into my blue and pull some blue into that magenta color that I was working with. It's still nice and thin, but now I've got sort of a purple. And what I'm going to do is with this medium to small size brush, I added some blue to the magenta I was working with, and I'm going to pull some lines down the center of the flowers. So like back here, I'm just going to add 1, 2, maybe here in the center, I add one thick line. And this just makes the appearance of kind of those bends and folds in the petals. And then with some of this, I'm just going to tap some in the middle because our middle is going to be our darkest area. All right, so still bouncing around. All right, I'm going to go back up to Mr. Owl. And I'm going to use my smallest brush, my detail brush. And I want to get some of this gray, but I want it to be a little darker. So if your pigment has evaporated enough that it's darker, that's great. If not, add a little more of that gray or black in there. We're going to add some details. So the first thing we need to do is add the center of his eye. So all of this up here for me is dry. If yours is not dry, hit it with a dryer first. So I'm going to add in the blackness of his eye. And this is my charcoal color, so he's nice and saturated. Hopefully this will lighten just a smidge. This is pretty dark. I was trying to go for a dark gray. I think that will lighten as it dries. Watercolor does lighten as it dries. So now we're going to just choose what we accent here on our owl. So I like to add kind of a hair or two coming off the end of his ears. I'm just adding in a little bit of black around that V. And so for this, just less is more. Choose what you want to accent. So just remember we're working in thin feathery movements. So I'm just, a little accent feather here or there in his ear. I'm going to pull on the left side of his beak and then just upward a little bit just to add a little shadow there. Maybe a spot here or there around the edge of his beard there, right around his chin. So just adding those little darker touches really emphasizes the details. Now I'm going to pull this around the left side of both of his eyes, just a little swoop to darken that just a little bit. And then again, I'm going to add some darker areas in his feathering. So down here, just a little bit of dark And I'm adding much less than I added earlier, but I am just pulling some feathers, accenting that wing shape, accenting the underside of that wing. But much less of this dark color than the previous colors we did. You know, maybe just a little touch here and there too. Wherever you feel like your owl needs it. This is where your owl can be different from mine, is in adding those finishing touches. So he's kind of cute. All right, so now I'm going to move on to my pumpkin. All right, I'm going to go back into my blue. This is a little moist, but it's not soaking dry. Gosh, can't get my words out tonight. So I'm going to get my blue, and I'm going to add in some swishes in this pumpkin. So make sure my blue is not wet enough. Here we go. So just adding in touches. There's no right or wrong. These are just fun little highlights that we're adding, just to give it a little more whimsy. You can be strategic if you have areas where you want to hide tracer lines, things like that. You can always add these additional layers in there. Just a little blue for fun. Wherever you want to add the blue. All right, so I'm going to go back to my orange. I am going to add a pinch of this gray to the orange, and then I am going to pull in more shadowing down here, just at the very bottom. So I kind of add in at the bottom edge, and then I just pull it up. I let the amount of water and the pumpkin itself just kind of determine how far up that goes. And then I'm going to take a little more of that, and I'm just going to define the underside of this pumpkin just a little. All right, one thing we have not done yet is the stem. So for the stem right now, I'm just going to pull in some green. And I'm just going to really just fill in that whole stem with the green. And again, if you're feeling froggy, you don't have to do this, but I'm just going to add a smidge of green like here and there on my pumpkin, because this is all we use the green for, is this and the stem. So while I've got it out, I might as well add some little funky green smudges in there. All right, we're going to go back to this flower and we are going to finish this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go right back to this magenta color. I'm going to add some more pure magenta right in here. This is the color we've been using all along. You can vary up your color if you have an option by adding a smidge of red, a smidge of purple, whatever you want to do. But I'm going to come in and I'm going to add some detail lines in this flower. So I'm going to highlight some, but not all, of the flower edges. I'm going to add some of this pure magenta here in the middle. So this flower is not, this whole painting honestly is not meant to be realistic. It's kind of a whimsical, fun, fall inspired piece. All right, so I highlighted some of those edges. I'm going to tap in a little more color here in the center. While this is wet, I'm going to dip right back into my gray, and I am going to tap in some gray into this wetness here. And right around the edge, I'm going to pull a little bit of that out. This guy's turning out a little different than my sample in a lot of ways. This flower is a lot lighter, but I think it blends in with this pumpkin a little bit better. All right. Now what I'm going to do is add some shadowing under the pumpkin. So for me, most of this is dry. If yours is still wet around this area here, go ahead and pause for a few minutes or hit it with a heat gun. All right, so I just don't want a lot of this blending up into the pumpkin. So what I'm going to do, first, before I do anything, is I am just going to tap a little bit of water, just a little, right underneath this pumpkin. I'm not going to touch the pumpkin, just right underneath it. Just a smidge of water. I'm going to dip into my gray, mix that in with this orange that I have going on. So it's really more of a gray with a tint of orange, and I'm just going to add a few smudges down here into that wetness. I'm okay if it makes a sharp edge. I'm okay if it blends out. We're just adding shadowing, I guess is what I wanted to say. So it can be a little brown, it can be a little gray, it can be a little orange, whatever. It's just kind of a dark patch there at the bottom. All right, I am going to take my brush, thin, medium, round. I'm going to go into some brown. I've got just the brown color here. And I am going to add kind of a line down the middle of that stem and just add some brown to a majority of that stem, but some of that green still peeks through. Now with my brown and this medium brush up here by the stem, again, my pumpkin's pretty dry. If your pumpkin is not dry, make sure you dry it first. I'm going to add a curly Q. So for this, I've got brown, a medium-sized brush. I'm not going to do a whole lot of these brown because I don't like them brown. I much prefer them green, but I do like variation. Got another one down here. Maybe one coming out of the flower. All right, so just a couple of those with your brown. And then I am going to pull some more green. All right, so with the green, nice thin brush, I'm going to add some curly cues and some viney things around my pumpkin. So very light pressure. I'm going to add, I don't know, I did 2 on the left here, maybe one little wispy one or two in the middle, and then over here on the side. So your viney things can be different from my viney things. You just add a little bit of fun. Add some around the flower. All right, so we've got them up and around the pumpkin. We do need to add some kind of underneath. So I am going to add just some curls kind of up and around the bottom of this pumpkin to hide some of this area. So just some wavy lines and some curls out around from the bottom of the flower and the bottom of the pumpkin. And if you're feeling bold, you can even add, you know, like a little leaf in there. With that green. Totally up to you what you do with the bottom. And curls, curly cues are fun. You know, you can add more or less, whatever you want to do. You can change up the green a little bit so that you have some variation. There's no right or wrong. These are hard for me to stop doing. I really like them. You will notice that your watercolor does fade a little as it dries. So if you want to go back over some of those, absolutely you can. All right, so for the most part, I am done with the watercolor portion of the class. And so from here on out, I am going to use my white acrylic. If you've got a nice thin acrylic paint, that is great. If you don't have a thin acrylic, just water it down a little bit with some clean water. Technically, this makes it mixed media, so I'm just going to get some white here. And part of the reason why I use acrylic is because it just gives a nice clean white. A white wash will work as well. But there are a few things on my painting that I want to enhance. So the first thing I'm going to do is get just a medium to thin round. And I don't want to see the outline of my moon. So I'm going to take some of this white and I'm going to come around the edge and just clean up that edge, try to hide that tracer line just a little bit if you can see yours. So just cleaning up the edge of that moon. With a nice bright white. So this is my white acrylic, nice and thin, just cleaning up that tracer line. And even not taking it away completely makes it look so much better. Next thing I'm going to do with the very tippy tip of this brush is I'm going to add 2 little dots in the black part of that owl's eyes. That gives them a little life. All right, now I'm going to get some more of this white, and I'm just going to add in some white highlights in this pumpkin. So wherever you feel like it needs just a little touch of white, I'm just going to add it in there. Typically, when you work with watercolor, the goal is to leave patches of white, the white paper showing through. But doing it this way is kind of a nice way to cheat that process. So just add kind of highlights on my pumpkin, just little swoops to highlight there. All right, we're coming up towards the end of the lesson, and so a lot of this is going to be up to your personal preference. What we have remaining is, so I am going to take some glitter and I'm going to add some glitter to my background here, and my glitter paint is acrylic. So again, mix this mixed media. What did I do with my glitter paint? I don't even know. Okay, it's over here. I found it. And so what I'm going to do is just pull some of this paint, and I'm going to do it right with my finger because then I can control where it goes. And you'll see as I was working, I have some splatter in the background. I don't even care because I'm going to add this glitter and it's not going to make a bit of difference. It's just going to look like it belongs there. So I'm going to lightly tap in the glitter and kind of move it around so that it goes where I want it to go. I do it with my finger because I don't want brush strokes. I just kind of want it to look random and organic. Of course, I'm going to smear some right here inside my moon because I mean, the moon should have glitter. The moon should sparkle. In my head, it sparkles. When I look outside, it sparkles. So I'm going to put some sparkle there in my moon. And I'm going to use most of my sparkle here on the left, but I will bring just a little bit, a little few touches here and there on the right, just to add consistency to this piece. But I don't want to go crazy. When you're using glitter and things like that, you just kind of want to, less is more sometimes. And this really is just to enhance it. So if this isn't your vibe, you don't have to do it. Or if you've got smaller glitter, you can use that. I kind of like the chunky stuff. So this is what I used. I used Folk Art Glitterific. So it's got kind of that chunky glitter look. On camera here, it looks really like dark and black. In person, the gold really kind of shines. But I also have this really fine glitter called Twinkles. So I'm going to add a little of that as well. Because glitter. I like glitter. Again, just going to pull some of this fine glitter in here with my finger. All right, so from here on out, it really is just your own finishing touches. Yours are going to be different from mine because there are going to be parts of my painting that I like and don't like, and parts of yours that you like and don't like. As far as mine goes, I think I'm just going to add a little more definition under this pumpkin. I feel like I kind of lost some of that up here with that shadow. And I may define my flower a little bit. But for the most part, this lesson is done. So, like I said, I am gonna define this pumpkin. If you are here with me live, now it's time to ask questions. If you have any questions, I'm just gonna finish this up and then we will be done for the evening. All right, as I finish up this flower, I'm just going to add a little, maybe another layer of color here. I just want to say thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really love sharing art with you. Art is my absolute favorite. It is my peace of mind. It is my calm in crazy life. And I cannot wait to see what you create. So if you have created with me, you can always tag me at Painted Cicada, and that will let me know on the socials that you've done that. Or feel free to join my group. I have a free group called the Painted Cicadas Art and Share, and it is a place where you can share all the lessons you have done with me, as well as anything that you do on your own. So I would love it if you would consider joining the group and sharing with me in there. I would love to have you. And then also just a shout out to anyone who is on my supporter list. you can become a supporter of the Painted Cicada for $4.99 a month, and that gives you access to each and every one of my lessons, as well as a special supporter only lesson every month. So it is a great deal. It's kind of a no-brainer if you like to paint and make art. $4.99 a month will get you all of my lessons, all of them, each and every one. And you can find information about that on Facebook. So check it out. On Facebook, my page is The Painted Cicada. And let me get this off the screen there. And I am finished. I'm super happy with how he turned out. Again, he's a little different from my sample, but every time that I create, my paintings are a little different depending on my mood and the paints that I use and things like that. So those are my two. I cannot wait to see yours. Don't forget to share with me. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great night, everybody. I'll see you next time.